Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of In the Eyes of Truth. Today with us is Finian Cunningham, and he is an Irish journalist, straight out of Dublin, right? You're in Dublin right now, or?
Not exactly Dublin, Stas, but in Ireland anyway. Yeah.
Well, country I've always wanted to visit, but unfortunately at the moment I can't for various safety reasons for myself, not because of Ireland or anything. And he's a commentator in international politics, and he is co-authoring a book on a very interesting subject that we'll discuss today. And that subject is, drum roll,
Yeah.
American intervention and revolutions, color, well, what we call now color revolutions, all over the world since post World War II.
Hey there, entrepreneurs. Are you feeling the squeeze from increasing regulations and higher taxes? Maybe you've noticed the growing instability and thought there has to be a better way. Well, you're not alone, and that's exactly why you need to consider offshoring your wealth now. Imagine a life where your hard-earned money isn't constantly under threat from unpredictable government policies. Sounds pretty good, right? Let me tell you. It's not just a dream, it's a smart strategy. Here at Exit Strategy, we specialize in helping entrepreneurs like you protect and grow their wealth. We navigate the complex world of international finance so you don't have to, from setting up offshore accounts to advising on the best countries with favorable tax laws. We've got you covered. Now, I know what you're thinking. Offshoring sounds risky, maybe even a bit shady, but the truth is many savvy business owners are already doing it. It's not just about dodging taxes, it's about creating a safety net for your future. Imagine diversifying your assets across multiple jurisdictions. When one country faces economic downturns, your wealth remains secure. Think of it as an insurance policy against the uncertainties of life. And let's not forget, having a portion of your wealth offshore can open up opportunities for international investments. You're no longer limited by the economic climate of a single country. You can tap into booming markets around the world, maximizing your returns. But here's the kicker. Time is of the essence. With increasing global scrutiny and tightening regulations, the window for easy offshoring is closing fast. The sooner you act, the better positioned you'll be. So why wait? Protect your wealth, secure your future, and explore new opportunities with Exit Strategy. Don't let the rising dangers in the US economy catch you off guard. Reach out to us today and take the first step towards financial freedom. Because when it comes to your wealth, playing it safe is the riskiest move of all. Thanks for watching, and remember, your future starts with the decisions you make today. Choose wisely, choose Exit Strategy. Catch you in the next video.
Well, thanks for having me on, Stas, and giving me a chance to give a little preview of this book that I'm working on with four other authors. I'll just mention the authors out of respect. Jeremy Kuzmarov, who's the editor of Covert Action magazine. Ron Wiedenauer, who's a veteran journalist that did a lot of work in Cuba and Central America. KJ No, who's also based in the US, but he's quite expert on Asian geopolitics, China, and the region. And then Daniel Kovalik, who's pretty well known, another well-known author. So between the five of us, we're doing this book on US regime change. Well, regime change for all Western imperialist powers, but the US is just out on its own for the number of regime change operations that it's conducted over the last 80 years around the world, in every corner of the world. So I'll just take a little break there, Stas, let you tee up a few questions, maybe.
And now you're doing this post World War II because for those that don't know their history, the first U.S. regime change was almost right after the U.S. Became an independent state. It was the Barbary Pirates, where you get the Marine song from the halls of Montezuma to was it halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli. That's the shore of Tripoli. Because in Tripoli they went and they removed the pirate king. I guess he wasn't a sultan, maybe a shah, and put his cousin on in the power place. So U.S. started
Mm,
this almost from day one.
yeah. Well, we're particularly focused on the post Second World War,
Hmm.
or after the Great Patriotic War for those from people from Russia who refer to it as that. But after the Second World War, you had the establishment of the United Nations in June 1945. It was a conference in San Francisco. Shortly after that, you had the UN Charter. Now, why we make that an important starting point in history is that that was clearly, very explicitly established the sovereignty of nations, and that all the nations of the world were guaranteed to have sovereignty that was inviolable. It was there could be no interference or aggression towards any nation. Its sovereignty. Sovereignty was sacrosanct as a principle of international law. Previous to that, the era you're talking about, so that you mentioned there, Stas, where there was a free for all for imperialism. I mean, the European imperial powers, the new imperial power of the United States would just at will go into any country they wish to do and just kick over the government, put in a tin pot dictator to run their affairs. So that was the kind of that was the international climate or regime at that time, before the Second World War. And one could argue that all that kind of imperialist rivalry led up to the First World War and then the Second World War. Now, after the Second World War, the world was so horrified with the violence of the Second World War, like 70 million death toll, perhaps 100 million, depends on how you calculate. Russia bore the greatest casualties, 27 million, maybe 30
Um,
million. China shortly
China, I
after.
think, bore more than we did,
Okay.
actually.
Well, I mean, it's just kind of like, it was just almost unspeakable, the horror.
Okay.
So there was some kind of like international will to try to um, formulate a kind of a legal order that would restrain imperialist conduct, or banish imperialist conduct, in fact. So you had the UN Charter set up where, as you mentioned earlier on, Stas, we were talking about earlier on, national sovereignty was the ultimate, the most inviolable principle, right. No country could interfere with the national affairs of another country, unless they were attacked, and they could invoke self-defense. And secondly, they would have to consult with the UN Security Council about the use of violence. Now, as you well know, Stas, I mean, the United States immediately totally ignored the UN Charter that it was a signature of. Um, it ignored it totally. I mean, they interfered in the Italian elections in 1948, a Greek civil war in 1948. I think in the French elections in 1947, there was a coup attempt in Syria in 1949. But the probably people point to the first big regime change operation, and that was in Iran in 1953. The Americans with the British, liaised, collaborated to overthrow the Iranian elected Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh. Then the year after that, 1954, Guatemala, an
Yeah.
elected president there, Jacobo Arbenz, was overthrown, all covertly. This was all covert. I mean, the so I mean, it was a flagrant violation of international law that the United States and its allies had signed up to, and therein, from their own, we just have had a litany of covert action regime change operations, latterly referred to as color revolutions. Um, some people would document the total number as over 80 regime change operations. Now, William Blum, the late William Blum, an American historian, he was dedicated his life to studying this whole phenomenon, and several books he's written on it. He would document in detail that there was something like 70 or 80 regime change operations. Now, that's before all out war is launched. I mean, you can kind of say that regime change operation is a stealth form of, well, it is a stealth form of imperialism, and it's used before the extreme necessity of going to war to achieve whatever you want. Like say in Vietnam, or the war on Iraq in 2003, the war on Afghanistan 2001. So before it gets to the level of all out war, there is a low intensity war, or a stealth war policy of regime change, which has been inflicted on, as I say, something like 80 or more countries around the world. And so from the very outset of the so-called, and the Americans talk about the rules-based order, the Blinken and Biden were, always talking about the rules-based order that they bragged or boasted about, that the Americans had created. Well, I mean, there was, complete chaos. Chaos was running a riot during the last 80 years since the UN was formed, and the UN Charter, the international law. All very laudable, and all very much, I think, praiseworthy, and one should aspire to put it into practice. But all through that period, I mean, the Americans just absolutely blatantly, ransacked the very principles that they had established through the UN Charter. So that kind of gets to the heart of why we see our world and wonder, why is there so much chaos and disorder and tensions and conflict? It's this regime change, this prerogative to just go in and kick over regime governments to form a regime of your liking, pertains to today. I mean, what we're looking at in Ukraine vis-a-vis Russia is part of a regime change strategy. When you look at how they've bombed Iran, again, it's a regime change operation. When you look at how the US continually antagonizes China over Taiwan, or previously over Hong Kong, it's all to do with destabilizing China, the Chinese government, for a regime change operation. So I think it's one has to really comprehend, contemplate the massive implications of this regime change policy, how it totally dominates our whole international relations.
Now, in Europe itself, particularly Western Central Europe, has suffered from the same fate. Now,
Yes,
for
you're right.
for you're also going to go into Operation Gladio, Operation Condor in the book.
Well, you put me on to Operation Condor. I wasn't actually thinking about that, but yes, I had. We're going to mention going to Operation Gladio. Thanks to Daniele Ganser's work. He's done great. The Swiss-based historian. He's done some fantastic investigative historical work on the existence, the creation of Gladio, its activities down through the decades. And that is going to be mentioned, Stas, for sure. Just to go back to a point that I made earlier on about the US, the CIA, going into Italy in 1948, Greece and France, around that period, to destabilize elections or influence
Hmm.
elections. I mean, that was a form of regime change operation. They were trying to prevent a certain government coming to power, like the communist parties, the socialist parties. So they were not trying to topple an incumbent government, but they're trying to prevent one from coming to power. So it's pretty much, it's another aspect of regime change, or regime, regime dictation, or whatever you put, however you put it. But the Gladio thing is an extension of that, as Daniele Ganser, documents that. So the CIA and the British counterpart MI6 created Gladio as a stay
Hmm.
behind clandestine network. Stay behind being that the idea was that if the Soviet Union invaded Western Europe, they would have this kind of commando group network throughout Europe to act as some sort of resistance. In the Italian version, it was called Gladio. There was other versions of it in every European country, from Germany to France to Belgium to, well, West Germany to France to Belgium to Denmark, and all over France, Europe. Now, as Daniel Ganser pointed out, that this kind of transition then into a more sinister purpose. It wasn't just about acting as a dormant resistance movement. They actually went into then covert actions to smear and discredit left-wing parties by unleashing secret acts of terrorism. Like, for example, in 1980, there was a bombing of the train station in Bologna in Italy, where 85 people were killed and scores of people were mutilated. Now, the idea of that, the nefarious idea of that, was to try to blame it on left-wing movements and then discredit the left at any forthcoming election. So there was from the record that Daniele Ganser has unearthed, there was like hundreds of such terrorist incidents over the decades, from the late 40s through to the 80s. And so that is a shocking revelation, that the CIA, MI6, and their other European counterparts, like the German, West German BND, and the French intelligence service, they were orchestrating right-wing terrorist groups, Gladio in Italy, but other names in other countries, to commit acts of terrorism, killing European civilians, all for the purpose of interfering and influencing electoral choices of the year. So, I mean, we've got here, a shocking example of how the Western powers covertly used covert action. We've talked about regime change. This was just an extension, or a kind of a variation of regime change. Covert action to interfere with the democratic process in countries. Now, the really important thing to understand here, I think, Stas, is that regime change isn't just something that the Americans carry out, well, the CIA carry out towards official enemies like Russia, China, Iran. It's a policy that is applied to every country, including so-called allies. And this kind of points up to the very extreme, sort of undemocratic nature of the American power system. That it's a complete, totalitarian regime of control of all countries, whether they're called allies or official enemies.
And I do disagree with you on one point, because Gladio wasn't only against left governments. They acted against right governments too, because Gladio helped overthrow the king of Greece, the monarchy, put in charge the regime of the colonels, and more interestingly, they helped to attempted assassination on de Gaulle and his family when de Gaulle started negotiations to release Algeria as a separate country. And then when that failed and de Gaulle exterminated the mutiny and the officers and fought back really hard, they gave him a color revolution. Well, okay, yeah, he also demanded have his gold back for the U.S. dollars. But they played a key role in a color revolution in France
Yeah.
to get rid of de Gaulle. And de Gaulle was no
Mm.
leftist in any form or sense of the. He was a nationalist.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I accept your point. I take your point, Stas. I mean, let's just put it like it's interfering in the sovereignty of nations,
Right.
whether they're called left or right. I mean, anywhere where there's a government that the United States wants to change for its benefit, its economic, strategic benefits, it will interfere with. I mean, and to get back to the whole point about the UN Charter, the establishment of the inviolability of national sovereignty as a framework of international law. From the very outset, the United States and its kind of Western counterparts set about quite blatantly to violate not just the spirit, but the actual letter of the law. Now, all very covertly, the CIA was set up in 1947, uh, and had a covert mission. Its covert mission was to completely transgress the international law to implement strategic interests of the United States. So it was after the Second World War that this policy really became formulated in a covert, uh, in a covert manner, and we're living with the consequences of that up till the present. I mean, if a country, if a power sets itself above the law, where it's just a rogue state. There is no law. I mean, there's a saying in civil rights movements that when those who uphold the law break the law, then there is no law. And we can see that manifest in the world today, where Israel, a proxy of the United States, is just bombing several countries at one time, killing killing children every day who are starving of food. I mean, the complete breakdown of international law is a consequence of the policy of regime change, which has been continually violating international law for the last, for ever since it was established. So I think if we want to, you know, if people want to try to understand what appears to be absolute chaos and mayhem around the world, it's not kind of a mystery. There is a root cause to this rampant chaos and mayhem. The root cause is the illegal, the criminal conduct of the United States and its Western allies from the very beginning of our so-called post-Second World War new era, our rules-based order, our rules-based disorder,
Right. What about NED, National Endowment for Democracy? Because they fund constantly these color revolutions, or the
Yeah.
parties taking part in these color revolutions.
Well, the CIA, started to get into trouble publicly, from its rampant criminality with these regime changes and assassinations of world leaders, all the attempts they had on Fidel Castro's life. They're linked to the assassination of the Congolese Prime Minister Patrice Lumumba. I think Augusto Trujillo, who was at one point a US stooge, but they got rid of him. So there was several world assassinations of international leaders that the CIA were linked to, and it all became quite controversial. The controversies were catching up with them in the 70s, and the Senate. The US Senate investigated with Frank Church, the Senate committee in 1975, 76. And I mean, there was so much criminality going on that it had to come out. It had to be investigated. They could no longer really cover this up. It was becoming so conspicuous. So, well, anyway, the CIA, through the Church Committee in 75, 76, a lot of its dirty laundry was brought out into public, and of course, a huge embarrassment for the CIA and its involvement in assassination and involvement in spying on Americans, involvement in a thing called COINTELPRO, counterintelligence, uh, dirty tricks in within the United States, which is a real violation of the US domestic law that the CIA could be even involved. So it was so embarrassing for the CIA that they had to reinvent their image somehow and form a new shell company for their activities. And this is where the National Endowment of Democracy comes in. It's formed under Reagan in 1983, shortly after the 70s exposés, or, well, near exposés of their dirty tricks. Not the full extent of them, mind you, but it was enough to be very embarrassing. So the CIA needed a makeover. Um, and this is where the NED comes in, and one of the founders of the NED, what's his name now? I think it was called somebody called Gershwin. He said like what we do today is what the CIA did 25 years ago. So it was quite it was quite sort of
Yeah.
blatant, that it was really just a reinvention of the CIA, but given a more sanitized makeover. They had a new image. The NED, National Endowment for Democracy. I mean, how could you not like that? It seems all very plausible. And but it gave the CIA a new front. It was no longer the sort of like, how would you say, the CIA could hide behind the NED and lots of other front groups that as a way of then carrying on with its dirty tricks, infiltration of countries, funding groups, destabilizing inside countries, and but it would kind of have a camouflage, a layer of seeming concealment.
Have you ever heard of the School of the Americas?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
notorious
Um,
killer assassination college or
every,
whatever.
every dictator in Latin America, left or right, whatever you want to look at them, well, American stooge, and half the special organ, from death squads to just security, they all came through school. I stumbled upon that School of Americas when I was stationed at Fort Bragg, going through basic and airborne school. Um, and me and a buddy of mine, and we came back to our sergeant. He's like, just don't go over there, just stay further away. But in the concept of the NED, the School of the Americas closed, right? So it closed, and it was closed for 2 years, and then opened up the Academy of Western Security Issues, or I, I I don't remember the exact name, but it was basically, I'm paraphrasing it, but that's what it is, on
Yeah,
Western Security, and it's the School of the Americas, just with a
yeah,
brighter
yeah,
name and a better
yeah,
shiny
yeah.
look.
Yeah, the new name is always a good ploy. Like, do you remember the private contractors in Iraq that got into huge
Blackwater.
controversy from, yeah, Blackwater? Then they became something else like Optima or something,
Yeah.
very,
They changed names like 3 times. I think it was he, and then it was Executive Decisions, and then yeah, so they just kept
yeah, yeah,
rebooting themselves.
yeah, just yeah, revamp, like makeovers. So yeah, so that's the NED. I'm going to ask you to tell us a bit more about Condor in a minute, Stas. But just to kind of like, so from the European kind of theater was Gladio and all these other groups. Now in the US, I've just seen a work from an article by Jeremy Kuzmarov, one of our co-authors in this book. He's got a new article out today in Covert Action magazine, which looks at how the CIA weaponized left-wing groups, like what was it, the Symbionese Liberation Army, all these
Hmm.
kind of exotic sounding left-wing groups, to commit crimes like robbing banks and kidnappings and all the rest of it, for the purpose of kind of trying to disorient disorientate the American public or voters, to alienate them from any sort of like legitimate left wing
Hmm.
political groups. So this, it's a kind of a counterpart of the whole Gladio network that was going on in Europe. As Jeremy Kozmarov has written in his latest article, it was the similar thing was being done in the United States. Uh, anyway, Stas, I'm going to ask you, tell me a little bit more about Condor.
Okay. Yeah, it's first of all, I think it's a very outdated matrix to look left and right. The reality when we're dealing with the U.S. is it's apolitical. It's about power and money. And it doesn't give a damn who's in power as long as it's making the money and they're doing what they're told.
Yeah.
So leftists, rightists, monarchists, Democrats, it doesn't matter. It's just, are you a puppet or not? Condor, by the way, if you look it up, Condor is actually linked. It ran parallel and intersected with Gladio. Condor was an operation where they took several Latin American countries, Argentina, for example, Peru. Um, they helped put in the various dictatorships, or they co-opted the governments, and they worked together. So if you had an opposition person in Argentina who was giving you too much trouble, you arrested him. The next day he was in Peru getting tortured. And when you're done with him, they flew him to Bolivia, and Bolivia flew him out in the middle of the Atlantic and dropped him off in the water, or his body, anyways. And people were
Mhm.
disappearing that way, working through this network that the CIA ran.
What years
And
was this, Stas? Years?
1970s, 1960s, 1970s, 1980s. So
Hmm.
they ran parallel with Gladio.
So
And
this
then
was a network of regimes, dictatorships working together as to sort of deploy death squads and what have you to knock off opposition people in within
mhm.
their countries.
And they were all
All masterminded,
on the
all,
American
all,
payroll.
yeah, orchestrated, masterminded, or kind of
Mhm.
executively run by the CIA.
And they were actually helping people
Right.
when Gladio operatives were getting exposed, because there's also the Franco regime, which was Gladio as a government, and they had camps for training the Gladio operators there. They had places for them to come relax. So I guess Club Med for Gladio. And if they got too exposed, they helped ship them over from to work in Operation Condor on the other side of
Yeah.
the Atlantic. So these guys are very, very linked. I mean, CIA, so they linked them all together. They had them all running in parallel.
Yeah.
Look it up. It's a very interesting network that they set
Yeah.
up.
Yeah, I'm familiar vaguely with it, but yeah, thanks for prompting me. But
Mhm.
to kind of, it will have to get a mention in the book, like sort of in connection to Gladio, and was this the Condor operation, was it to determine the political framework of the target countries to eliminate certain potential political rivals?
It was, yeah, I served under, God rest his soul, General Griffin back when he was a colonel. And General Griffin started his career as a Marine, as just a Marine grunt. And one day he sat down with me and a couple other officers we're eating chow, and he's started just telling us everything. And they would deploy them. This was 1960s, and they would just run them up and down Latin America to crush. Officially, they were invited in, but they were invited in to crush local populations that had revolted
Hmm.
against exploitation by American corporations. They'd run them like slaves until the people
Hmm.
broke. And this wasn't again about right or left. These people were just being extremely exploited by a foreign corporation, run by with a government that was an extreme, well, a fully puppet government of a foreign entity. And then he said,
Hmm.
they'd bring us in, and these people they were either driven off their lands, or they weren't allowed to unionize, and they were paid nothing, and they were not allowed to stop working either. So basically slaves or something, serfs. And then
Hmm.
they'd bring him in to crush any revolt against flat out
Yeah.
corporate oppression.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's really it's a very sinister, um, I think, revelation digging into this. I mean, it really does question, undermine, or dispel sort of illusions about, Western democracy. The Second World War alliance, the Allies, the United States, Britain working with the Soviet Union. After that war, which was mainly won by the Soviet Union, I mean, the Allies, the Western Allies, immediately started collaborating with fascists,
Oh yeah, yeah.
leftovers from the Nazi regime, the Ukrainian Nazis, and recycled them into South America, which ties in with the dictatorships and Operation Gondor, Condor, sorry, Operation Condor. So, when you look at, the more you kind of look into it, the more you realize just how kind of like organic this, you know, I would say fascism, this fascist kind of a, authoritarian politics is. And it really does disabuse people of this very, rosy or, sort of a blithe notion of Western democracy. I mean, and it's quite a shocking revelation. I mean, and I'm sure a lot of people aren't shocked; they all knew this already. But for people who are, the myth of the Western virtues and democracy, all those things. It really is shattered completely when you look into this kind of these topics that we're talking about right now. And I mean, and once you kind of start to realize it you can't change it back. I mean, it's
You can't
not
unsee
the
it.
genie is out of the bottle. The genie is out of the bottle, and you can't unsee it. You can't put it back in. It's escaped. But it really has to. It's a harsh wake up, but it has to be done if we want to
Yeah.
understand the nature of violence in our world, why there's continual conflict, tensions, and war. I mean, we're talking about the number of regime change operations that the United States and its Western allies like Britain have carried out over the last 80 years. I've counted up, about 80, at least
Mhm.
80, thanks to people like William Blum.
Finian, we've got we're almost out of time. We've got less than a minute left. And I hope you come back. We can continue the conversation and continue discussing what's going on in Western Europe in general, the Ukrainization of Europe, as we call it here. Everybody, thank you for joining. If you have any questions, leave it in the comments. I'll make sure Finian gets it. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Stas. Well, good luck with your show. It's great to see another alternative, independent show out there.
Uh,
Provoking thoughts and stuff. Yeah,
it's the only way. You can't trust the media, the mainline media.
yeah. Well, good for you, Stas.